So hello, everyone. I think we're all agreed that we're here for the same reason. We're coming to create brave space together. And so, Kiara, can you go ahead and start sharing the slides? As Kiara gets ready, I want to introduce Kiara to you just quickly. She is my eldest child who lives in Ireland. And she's also the virtual assistant for Awaken Coach Institute. So it's super, super fun to get to work with my own child. And Kiara's been able to help me with these slides and put in like this beautiful picture of me just now and do lots of other fun stuff together. And I'm actually visiting at her house right now in Ireland, which I don't often get to do. So it's really fun to get to be here with her. So welcome, Anna, welcome, Irene, welcome, Martha. It's really good to see you all here today. So we're gathered because we want to create brave space. And brave space is what allows us to create community. And so I'd like to walk you through today what some of the pillars are of making sure that that happens. And that's one of the main things that we do at Awaken Coach Institute is make sure that it's actually our very first class. We start with creating brave space together. And I don't so much explain it as just do it. But then we do go on to learn how to create it for our clients. And that's kind of step one of going through the course. And so I'd like to invite you to do some of that with us now. So can you go to the next slide, Kiara? Some of the reasons that people like to create brave space is because they want to be able to stay centered in themselves if they're going to be having a difficult conversation. I know that in many countries these days, there's quite a political divide and people's opinions get polarized. And so we want to make sure that you're able to align your head and your heart and your gut, and be able to make decisions and have these conversations that include everyone. And we also want to make sure that when you're in a team or your family or in your community, that you're able to take leadership using your voice to make sure that all other voices are able to be heard. Kiara, I think we might have skipped one slide that just had that picture of me yes, exactly. So before we get started, I want to introduce myself for those of you who don't know me yet. And so I'm Christy, and I'm the creator of Awaken Coach Institute, which trains people how to be brave and loving listeners of others. And you get a professional coach certification when you come to our courses. And the main thing that I want to say about me is that my purpose in life is to create communities of grace. And part of this is because in my younger years, I didn't always feel like I was part of a community of grace. There was certainly some bullying when I was a young person. I didn't always feel like I was part of my family. And so it's really beautiful for me to be able to create spaces where everybody's voice gets heard, everybody can speak up, everybody matters. And so that's the foundation for everything that we do here. Go ahead and next slide, Kiara. And the next one after this. Right. And so I'd love to hear which of these makes brave space matter the most to you. So if you can go ahead and put in the chat, our participants. And Kiara, maybe you can even read some of those out for us. What is brave space about for you? Are you wanting to welcome all voices? Are you wanting to have better relationships in your families and teams? What are you here for? So go ahead and just type in the chat what you're here for. So Carla's wanting to create a supportive space for all to be vulnerable. And I know you already do that quite a bit, Carla. So thank you for your work. Paula wants to welcome all voices, have spaces of respect. Debbie wants to be without any concerns within social norms, just be me. That's so true. And I really feel all of these with you. Better communication skills on both sides. There's a lot of reasons we want to be here, and it's important right now for us to be able to do that. So thank you so much. And I'd like to hear also from you, I think this is on the next slide, Kiara. Yeah, learn from diversity and grow, allow vulnerability. So true, all of that. And it's so important, especially I know there's some of us in the room who are coaches. And so that can be really key to allow people to speak when you're listening to them. So thank you so much. Kiara, next slide. And so this is, I just want to give you some insight into what a couple of people are saying who've been through our course. So this person is actually someone who I've never even met. Emma is a client of one of our coaches. So she's kind of 2 steps removed from me. I train people to listen well. And this is someone who's come to one of our coaches who's graduated from our course. And she said she's had this shift in perspective. She's able to really enter into the corporate space in a new way with self-esteem and confidence. She feels like I can do it. And she's able to have crucial conversations instead of avoiding them. And that's just from 6 sessions with her coach. And that's someone who graduated from Awaken. And so that's what we really want to create is this big ripple effect so that when we come together in spaces like this one, where we create brave space here, that goes on to impact many other lives beyond us. So go ahead to the next slide, Kiara. So let's just set the stage here together and ask ourselves, and feel free to use the chat. And so Kiara can't see the chat while she's presenting, so I will be looking at the chat as best I can. I know it kind of scrolls by quickly because you guys are very active. But what would make this the best space? And feel free to answer that question. I'd also love to hear if you want to answer the next question. What would make you disappointed? What would make you say, I really wish this had been different? What do you need from this group in order to make this the best hour possible together? And what permission do you need to give yourself so you can show up fully? So these are a lot of questions for just a brief chat. I would just recommend maybe pick one of them and go ahead and say it. But these are the 4 questions, and you're welcome to write them down because these are the 4 questions that we use in our Brave Space course to make sure that everybody is able to show up and they know that their voice is going to be heard, especially if it's a dissenting voice. So that's why when we start creating Brave Space, it's vulnerable and just as important to be able to share our hopes and dreams, and also to be able to share our fears, worries, and disappointments. So I'd love to see in the chat, especially if any of you want to answer, what would be disappointing? I've asked these questions in corporate settings before, and sometimes people say, you know, if there's no sharing of failures, that would be disappointing. Or if you're not going to be real, that would be disappointing. If it's all going to be kind of rah, everything is amazing, that would be disappointing. And maybe what would make it great for you? And the reason I ask these questions is because I do want to make sure that I'm actually in a conversation with you, because you're the one who's showed up today. Okay. Yeah, it's really tricky when people don't understand you in society. And it's also tricky when somebody dominates and discourages people. And avoiding, thank you. Getting comfortable with discomfort is another way people put it. And so calling people in can sometimes be helpful instead of calling them out, finding that time to actually speak your own experiences to them. So thank you for putting in the chat what you're hoping for. Next slide, Kiara. So let's go ahead and start with the 4 pillars. And at any time, please just raise your hand if you'd like to stop and talk about this a little bit more fully. Next slide, Kiara. So we want to start with, when you want to create brave space, it kind of feels like a full contact sport. I mean, just what you guys are putting in the chat already, it's like, oh, there can be fear. That can be like, I actually don't really want some of those voices. Some of them are too loud. Some of them are too critical. I would rather avoid them. And so the best thing that you can do if you really want to have a good conversation or take a decision that might require some leadership is to find yourself, find your center. And so I want to walk us through that. Next slide, Kiara. And so I'd love it if you're willing to do this with me. And so we want to start by just doing a little bit of breathing. And as we're just letting the in-breath and the out-breath take a little bit longer than usual, find your center. You might want to put your hand over your heart. Some people like to give themselves a little squeeze on both arms and get connected with your own values. So for me, I mentioned a little earlier that what I want to bring to every situation is community and grace. And so that's what I want to do here today. And that's what I want to do in my family, on my team at Awaken, and in just about every situation that I enter. And I know that I'm going to make good decisions when I focus on community and grace. And when I don't, I tend to get off track. When I get judgmental, harsh, not wanting to listen to people, etc. And so it really centers me to be gracious and kind with myself and my family before I come to this webinar today. It centers me to do a little hand on heart, hand on head, connect with my values, and focus on what's important to me about this space that we're in right now. And so go ahead and get a little bit more clear on yourself. What does center you? What are your values? And connect with those as we move to the next slide and continue a little bit more centering. And so it can be really helpful to make sure that your body is aligned. And so I would invite us to either put a hand on the head and one on the heart, because you want to line up that, you know, your emotional energy is so powerful. The energy in the heart is so powerful. And when it's aligned with logic and thinking, even in those tricky situations that you might have wanted to avoid, you can find some alignment. For other people, the image that the woman is doing there, some people like to have one hand on the heart and one on the gut. Notice if there's any constriction in the muscles at any point, and just see how much alignment you can get between what your heart would love for you to do and maybe what your gut is anxious about or fearful of, and see how much alignment you can get between your heart and your gut. And this is just really important. to know how to do as quickly as you can. So I would say, before I come on a webinar, for example, it might take me a few minutes. You also want to be able to line up your head and your heart and your gut. Just one or two breaths, because you want to be able to remember it when you're in that meeting situation or in that family situation or in that time that feels really tricky. But you know what? Let me come back to myself first, line up my logic and my gut and my heart, connect with my values, take a pause. And it may be that if you find that you're not centered, if you get triggered shortly thereafter, either you learn to get back to center, and you just go ahead and do it again, or you learn to just do it with one short breath, so that maybe you're doing it every 5 minutes throughout the day. If you're like me, I tend to get very, I have a lot of emotions that go through my body, probably like most people. And so I read somewhere a few years ago that you might have to go through a breathing exercise every 5 minutes all day long. And so that would be a little bit too much if it took you 5 minutes to do it each time. But if you can do it with one breath or two breaths at any time that you notice that there's a powerful emotion going through you, that can just be a very quick way to stay centered throughout the day. And that might not replace if you have a practice in the mornings or evenings or a time that you can get quiet for longer. But see how regularly you can make this part of your daily life, so that even if you're getting triggered, you can one breath, two breaths. Maybe you have a little movement that you do. There's a comedian, stand-up comedian who I love to watch, named Hannah Gadsby. She's autistic, and I know some of us in the room are autistic and may not, may get a lot of triggers from society if we're not really well understood. And so one thing that she does is she takes two fingers and she just places it on her chest anytime she starts getting anxious while she's doing a comedy routine. I never would have noticed that she's doing that, but she created this body movement for herself. It just takes no time at all, but she's kind of anchored that as I'm calm, this is okay. And so once she does it, you can see her doing it even 20 times over during an hour-long comedy routine. And so just get used to doing whatever you do that centers you as often as you need to do it. There's nothing wrong with you if you need to do it even every couple minutes. It's just a really good check-in. So that's pillar number one, is start with yourself. Pay attention to how you're feeling, how you're breathing, and get yourself lined up with the truth of what you want to say. Next slide, Kiara. So this is where it gets really, really courageous. And this is where all voices get heard in a really powerful way. And so there's a term that is used in organizational and systems coaching called deep democracy. And part of what we do as systemic coaches is we invite dissent. And that's something that you can also do as a leader on your team. It's something you can do in your family. It's something that I very much would have appreciated and did appreciate when my parents were able to do it from time to time. But as a parent or as a friend, your relationships are going to be a lot deeper if you can invite dissent. I've borrowed the words invite dissent from Peter Block's book, Community. And that is one of the key conversations that's necessary for brave space. And that goes back to what we did earlier, where not only do we ask, what would you love from this time together, but what would be disappointing to you? You want to actually go out of your way to look for, what would my kid want to tell me? What would my kids want to say they're really angry about in my parenting? I'm not sure that very many parents really want to ask that question, because we all made so many mistakes probably, but it sure does a lot for the relationship there, or really in any other relationship, when you can actively, openly invite the other person to tell you what hurt, what made you angry, what was your difference of opinion about this. So next slide, Kiara. And so just to go a little bit deeper into how we invite dissent, this is really key, is the removing labels. Okay. So let's say, for example, you go into a team and there's this one person who is constantly complaining. And so the rest of the team is like, oh my gosh, she's such a criticizer. She's always blah, blah, blah. She gets hysterical. And so they put this person off in their own corner, while the rest of the group can kind of offload some of their anxiety by projecting it all on this one person who's then the complainer or the hysterical person, or like he's always so aggressive or whatever it is, and they make that person the bad guy. So I want to invite us to think differently in whatever group that you're in, and instead think of that person as a voice in the system. And sometimes the biggest dissenter, the biggest complainer, the biggest, I was going to say a swear word, but let's not do that. Sometimes the people that you really just are very unhappy with are the most important voices to be heard. They might be offering an opinion that is different, that's important, that comes from oppression. I had a team coaching courageous conversation that I did a couple months ago, and it was about diversity and inclusion. And so we started out, we did kind of a jam board, and we had everybody just put their first name. How close or how far are you from the statement, we need more diversity and inclusion in our company? And so, of course, everybody wants to say, yes, we need more diversity and inclusion. And so sure enough, 99% of the people all stuck their names right on top of the yay for diversity and inclusion, except for these two people who put their names far away. And so you could kind of feel the tension in the room, that these are people that don't care about diversity and inclusion. And so my job as a coach is to hear the voices all clustered in the center and to hear the dissenting voices. And so I do that by moving my name to stand. And if we were in a room together, I would physically go move my body next to the dissenter, because those are your brave people who are risking a lot, who are risking rejection, who are risking not belonging, who are risking not being popular by saying the hard thing. And so what happened, I went over and asked these couple of people, okay, you've put your name far away from, we need more diversity and inclusion. And their stories were magnificent. And they were saying, this is what we're measuring here is percentages and numbers, and we've been doing it for years. And we invite the woman from India into our British team, or we invite, the other into our team. And then we're so awkward, we don't know what to do about it. So why don't we get better at figuring out how to be kind to people and how to learn about people instead of just increasing our numbers? And so we wouldn't have heard that voice. And some of these voices were actually from more marginalized or oppressed voices that were speaking up. And it was a call for more alignment and more reality and less performance. And so just because somebody's criticizing does not make them that loud, aggressive, hysterical, whatever you want to call it. If one person is willing to say a dissent, the United States Supreme Court always publishes their dissents because it's important to know that if you have 9 justices, you may have had 4 of them that disagreed and you want to know why. So even if you don't always do what the dissenters say, if you want to make a really good decision, you don't want to call them a dissenter. You want to say, dissent is needed on our team right now. Let's hear all the voices. And so you move your body toward that angry, fiery, negative, critical, whatever it is, scary, loudmouth person, and soften yourself up to hear what they have to say. And you even invite other people to add, yeah, what else do we need to say about this point of view? And really, going back to that centering, use your own soft, kind body to show that you're serious, that you really want to hear all the voices. I'd love to hear from you. How is this landing? I know for some people, this can be like, no, I do not want to hear it. So feel free to unmute and speak up or put it in the chat, however you best want to communicate today. How is this landing, that you center yourself so that you can then invite dissent? And feel free to say if you have questions, or if you would like to dissent. Maybe you don't want to invite dissent, and that's, love to hear that too.
What if you are, I'm not sure if you're the dissenter or not, but what if you are speaking and you just actually really felt you're met with conflict, and then not heard,
right?
Not that you don't feel that they actually were listening to what you're saying and just went so quick to the
yeah, shut it down, your voice didn't get heard. Exactly. And that's probably why I'm so passionate about this subject, because I feel like I've been in that position, and probably a lot of us. I think that's very relatable. It's making a lot of sense to Carla. It's making a lot of sense to someone else just put a comment in the chat too. Like, what if you are the dissenter and you're not getting heard? And what I would say is, one thing you can do is set it up in advance so that dissent is requested on your team. And so there's a book, for example, called The 6 Thinking Hats by De Bono. And it teaches teams how to like just pretend that you don't have a label or a role. You're not like the dissenter as a person, but you may be wearing your magical dissenting cape at that time. You can take off the cape and set it in front of the group and say, let's all wear this cape for a moment. So the 6 Thinking Hats does that. One of the hats is a red hat, and it's the hat of criticism. I forget what they call it exactly, but you've got, some of the hats are like all green lights. You're like, this idea is going to work. And instead of having a person, you have a hat, and the entire team is invited to wear the green hat. Brainstorm what's going to make this wonderful. And then the entire team is invited to wear the red hat, the critical hat, before making any decisions. You could also request that you do a turn and talk. So instead of only the leader's views being heard and then the dissenters struggling, you have everyone write down their idea at the same time on a piece of paper, and everyone turns their paper over at the same time. And then you very specifically go around the room requesting, we would like to hear from all people, so that you're really leveling the playing field and not setting it up so that a person is the dissenter, but that this is, our system requires a lot of different voices. And so you kind of want to, as much as you can, step back and have it reorganized at a systemic level on a regular basis, so that you don't get stuck in like, you're the critical one, you're the one who's always complaining, because that's, nobody wants that role. Another thing that you can do is, if you tend to be the one who gets stuck with the critical dissenting role, which is so important and it's such a service to society, it's still not always the most fun role to have. Just see what happens if you play around with, like, this is a hat, let someone else wear it today. And so sometimes a dissenter can just boycott their dissenting role for a while, very consciously, and say, let's see what happens when I become rah supportive of the ideas. And you can almost guarantee that somebody else will pick up the dissenting role because it's necessary on the team. And so it can be fun to just play with that. Like, you must have the dissent, but if it gets kind of focalized on a particular person, see how you can play with the magical cape to take it on or off. It might be uncomfortable to not dissent, or to dissent, to do the opposite of your typical behavior, but see if you can get more people on the team to be flexible in their dissenting and agreeing roles. Is that helpful? Are there other questions? Seeing some head nods. All right. Kiara, let's move on to the next slide. And so this is just kind of a thought for yourself. You can write these down, or you'll be getting the slides with the replay. What circumstances would you find it a benefit to invite dissent? I'd love to hear, like, how good do you want to get at this? Do you want to get better at it with your kids or grandkids? Do you want to get better at it with your team at work? Do you want to invite the alternate opinions with social justice missions that you work on? There might be voices that just don't get heard. Maybe you have a special love for introverts or autistic people, or you want a particular kind of voice to get a little bit more play in society. And then, if you're willing to, what's your next step? See what benefits you can get from actually doing it in the next day or two. What will happen when you do invite another voice to speak up? And if you'd like to put anything about that in the chat, you are very welcome. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, and I'm seeing the chat too. So yeah, Tina would love to hear more from the kids when they disagree. Project teams, it is so important. If you do ever feel that it's a personal attack, it can really be helpful to go back to pillar number 1 and just say, let me breathe, let me get back with my values, let me continue inviting dissent, and choose to not take it personally. And for Debbie, asking for different views can be, another language, another possibility for asking for other opinions. And if you'd like to read the book Community, it's like a 1970 something book. It's an old classic on community building, and he explains why he uses the word dissent for a reason. But Annelise, would you like to speak?
Yes, maybe on the fact not to react and take things personally. I think it's also important to stay vulnerable and to admit that some of the things may be hurting, because actually at least for me, it's easier this way to recognize that you have emotions and to say, okay, you know, I hear this way, and for this and that reason, it can be difficult for me, and especially afterwards on a one-on-one basis. It's something I have worked on personally because I tend to take things personally. Obviously.
Thank you. Exactly. And so that is the exact third pillar. If you want to move us along, Kiara, Annelise, we'll just have you do this talk next time. So that is exactly what third pillar is, because you're inviting other voices to dissent. But what about your own? What about your own? Like, I felt hurt. I took that personally. This is how that landed with me. This is how that decision affected my commute, or my ability to talk with others on this team, or my ability to belong in this family, and to actually speak up that this is how I experience things. And to me, that's the hardest of them all. Like, it's almost easier to invite dissent or other opinions for some people. I know it can be really hard, all of it, but this one here, thank you for saying that, Annelise, because this one is really at the heart, and it's probably the hardest one for me. I'm much better at listening to others than I am at expressing myself. I just find it really, really scary. Yeah, especially when you've been misunderstood, not been heard, and you feel like you have to fight to find your voice. And so the way you expressed it, Annelise, is just beautiful, because you're talking about keeping your heart soft when you're expressing it, that you're claiming your experience without necessarily being combative about it. So next slide, Kiara. And so this is where it's just so tricky to not project, not attack, not use you language, but to really say, this is just how I experienced it. And you're allowed to experience it differently. But as soon as you have someone like Annelise who's brave enough to say, this is how this affected me, or this is how, these are what my emotions are around it, that's not something that anybody can really fight you on. I mean, it's sort of like the basis of nonviolent communication that was developed by Marshall Rosenberg, that you state, these are my feelings and my needs. This is my experience. And you're also open to what are your feelings? What are your needs? What is your experience? And sometimes if you're the first to be open about, this is what it's like for me, and not just accepting everybody else's made up stories. I mean, there's only so much you can do about what other people think of you. That's not really the point, but you can say what your experience is so that everybody has more information in the pool. And this can be especially important when you share your stories of failure, just being vulnerable and saying, this is, I'm trying to do my best, and yet I got really upset and angry and attacking. And so I'd like to apologize, or I'd like to circle back and say, this isn't in line with my values. It's not how I want to behave, and it's not fair to you. And so I'm committing to doing better the next time. And so taking responsibility for yourself, owning your feelings, owning your thoughts, it's a huge part of creating brave space for everybody. And there's just something that happens in a room, isn't there, when one person decides, I'm going to show up as me. And once again, you might go back to your breathing or your centering as you do this. And you might share, just be aware of what you're sharing. Are you sharing because you're wanting to benefit the whole, or are you wanting to attack someone else? And make sure that you really are staying in your experience for the benefit of everyone. Next slide, Kiara. And so this is another little mini homework question. So let's say you do start claiming your experience as your own more and more often, even if other people had really different stories? What's going to change for you in your relationships? Yes, and your intention is really key. It is that you want to have a gaze, not a stare. You want to have a soft tone, not a harsh voice. You want to have just a wild and open heart, very grounded in your back, and an open heart center to speak. And so this is just something for you to take home with you. What will change for you when you do start claiming your experience? How will your family, your team, your workplace, your community efforts be different when you're willing to show up as your full self? Next slide, Kara. And finally, yes, so always remembering to breathe throughout. The last pillar that really helps is to find your community for you. And this one has been a lot of learning for me just in I would say the last 2 or 3 years. I've known for a long time that my purpose is creating communities of grace. And so I've done a lot of work creating group experiences, creating places for other people to be able to share their stories. But I haven't always included myself in the community. I tend to kind of be worried about rejection, and I reject myself before anybody else can reject me. And so it's been really important in the last couple of years for me to start including myself, sharing more of my story, more of who I am, and finding spaces where I can have friendships where I'm included in the community as well. Good news is if you have yourself, if you have pillar 1, you really are breathing, you're noticing what's going on with you, you're claiming your story, pillar 3, you don't need a huge crowd of raving fans. So next slide, Kiara. Even if the whole world was criticizing you, if you had 7 billion people that were all doing their best to send stuff to your Twitter feed saying what an awful person you are, you can survive that if you have compassion for yourself and you have one empathy partner. And that empathy partner, you want to choose really wisely, and you want to choose them based on a track record. And so you don't find these empathy partners randomly in 5 minutes online. You claim your experience as your own. You let them claim their experience as their own. You stay vulnerable. You add another layer of trust, another layer of vulnerability, and you kind of build your house slowly, moment by moment. And when you mess up, you apologize, you circle back, you invite dissent, you claim your experience as your own, and you build these relationships. And so if you've got 1 or 2 or 3, you are truly blessed. I mean, hopefully this is someone that you see regularly. It could be a very dear friend, it could be an old friend, it could be a partner, but just one person who you know is willing to see you and hear you and love you right now. They're not going to be there because they need to fix you or change you or give you advice, although maybe they do if you ask them for some advice, if you want that to be part of your relationship. But in general, they're there because they love you, and they love you when you make mistakes, and they think you're just fine. And so next slide, Kiara, I would love for you, if you each have one of those people, check yourself and see, how often do I connect with my empathy partner? And how often do I focus on their opinions and what they think instead of what your imaginary random stranger crowd of people thinks? Sometimes we get so interested in what they think that we forget about, what do I think? What does my empathy partner think? How do we want to support me to make the best, most brave, most loving decisions in my life. And so this is a homework activity that you can also take home for yourself, is just write yourself, who is your empathy partner? How connected are you to them? What are you doing today to build a little bit more vulnerability, compassion, and community with them? And what is your next step to invite yourself into brave community with this empathy partner in your life? Next slide, Kiara. And so just to recap, stay connected with you throughout. Do it first, do it during, do it after, as much and as often as you want. Stay connected with yourself. Invite all the opinions, the deep democracy, those voices that might have been so downtrodden that they come out as harsh, angry, bitter, and claim your own experience too. Add your voice to the mix. Say what your feelings and your needs are, and find your community. Next slide, Kiara. And so that is what we do at Awaken Coach Institute. When you join our course, Creating Brave Spaces, day one. And so we do this together. We actually have an interview process and an application that everyone must fill out to be accepted to the course, because there's just something magical that happens when you've been asked the question, do you promise to love everyone in this space exactly the way they are right now without trying to fix or change them? And you know that everybody else who joins the course has been asked that same exact question. And so you come into the course already anticipating that there is going to be some brave space created, that you've signed up for it, that everyone else has signed up for it. And then you've got 23 more classes after Brave Space that really dig deep into your identity, your spirituality, the beliefs that you've held, the ones that you want to change, ways that you can grow into a very loving, compassionate, brave leader in your life. Next slide, Kiara. And so it can get really frustrating for compassionate people like us who really want to make a difference in the world. Next slide, Kiara. And for a lot of the people that I work with at Awaken, they're going through a pretty significant transition. Sometimes they would call it spiritual transformation, or they might call it falling apart, or confusion, transition, breakdown, not having a clue, but really wanting loving community and brave space where you can kind of figure it out for yourself, even as you're wanting to help others. Next slide, Kiara. And so we do create community. That is our core. Just acceptance and love and bravery is the core that we start with on day one, and we maintain throughout relationships over the years. Even after the course is finished, people do tend to remain friends and keep in touch with each other. Next slide, Kiara. And so what about you? What if you could become a compassionate leader who really loves well? Next slide, Kiara. And so I want to introduce you very briefly, just for a few minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions about anything we've talked about, to our coach certification program. So this is an all-in-one program. Next slide, Kiara. Where you get everything that you need to be a credentialed, internationally recognized credentialed coach. And so we are very happy. We even have one participant on the call today who's going to be joining us Fridays, September through December. So that's a 16-week course. It's one kind of 3-hour block every week over a series of 4 months. And then once you've finished the course, next slide, Kiara. It's actually part of lifelong learning. So you'll actually have access to the whole course, the videos and the worksheets and everything for life. So that you have access to. Then we have 16 weeks of really creating this beautiful brave space together as you learn to become a coach. And after the course is finished, you have 6 months of mentor coaching with our senior faculty, so that you're really supported as you're having that ripple effect that we saw at the beginning, where your clients are actually going, oh my goodness, in just 6 hours with you, I had a really life-changing experience. Next slide, Kiara. And if you want to get really ridiculous, as some people are doing, flying in from around the world, is to do the whole course, the whole 4-month course, condensed into 10 days. So this is a real intensive in-person, and it's going to be so gorgeous. If you look at the link, next slide, Kiara, you'll see these, like, that's just one little tiny picture. You see that Indian Ocean image? It is going to be gorgeous. Yoga in the mornings at sunrise on the beach of the Indian Ocean. And then really transformational activities throughout the day. And then again, you'll have 6 months of mentor coaching after the course to make sure that you have all the support you need as you're building your coaching skills, whether you're doing that in your current job. Some people have said that they actually got a job because they had coaching skills. Thank you, Paula. Other people are actually setting up coaching practices. And so they're actually starting a business as a coach. Whatever your reason, or some people are just really want to be a better leader at work. Maybe they have line management responsibilities or executive responsibilities, and they want to be more brave and more compassionate and do a better job. They will also come to our course. Next slide, Kiara. And so those are your 2 options for this year. We are looking only for people who are willing to be loving and creative and courageous, and who are willing to accept people the way they are right now, because that is what is needed for positive change. Next slide, Kiara. So more testimonials. We've had people from around the world in this course, anything from Thailand, Singapore, Senegal, Tanzania, UK, France, Germany, United States, Canada. We've had people from every country enjoying getting to know each other and just absolutely excited about what they're learning and growing with. Next slide, Kiara. Alvin had a wonderful experience. He talks about spirituality, beingness, presence, trust, unfolding. And even on Zoom, you'd be amazed. We can really have a wonderful time together doing that. Next slide, Kiara. So I think we've already said, this is the right program if you are interested in bravery and compassion and higher potential and spirituality. Next slide, Kiara. And we would just say, do not come if you intend to change anybody else, fix them, give them advice, or if you're coming just because you want a certification. You do receive a certification, and we're very happy that it's a professionally accredited, recognized certification, but that's just the icing on the cake. We want you to come if you want to be changed and be more loving and brave. Next slide, Kiara. All right, more of who we're not looking for. And next slide, Kiara. Thank you so much. All right. Liani, welcome.
Hello, everyone. I was busy coaching.
Oh, good for you. So Liana, do you want to just say 2 words? You're coaching because you graduated from Awaken. What do you want to say about that? Just for 1 minute.
Wow. I am just amazed that it works every single time, because I was coaching a friend about a project that she wanted to do. And so I was trying to remember the Walt Disney model that you taught. We did a skills drill a few months ago. But now with the mentor coaching that I'm doing after the coaching course, I've learned some of the like some of the stuff that I was taught is more familiar, and I'm trying to apply it. And I didn't know if those two things could happen at the same time in my brain, but it did mostly. So I was really encouraged.
Yay!
So yes.
Well, you are a wonderful coach. We're so proud of you. Leonie's calling in from South Africa and graduated a few months ago.
Yeah, April.
Yeah, April. And you're setting up a coaching business now. So very brave.
Week 3.
Yes.
The baby is 3 weeks old.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here, Leonie. So I'd love to open it up for questions. I know we're right at the top of the hour. So if anyone needs to go, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to thank you, Carla. I'm going to stay on the line a few more minutes just in case anyone would like to ask some questions privately. Thank you, Anna. So feel free to unmute, and happy to have a conversation with you.